I want to ask you something, and I want you to answer it honestly, not the way you think you should answer it, the way your gut answers it before your brain has time to clean it up. Here's the question. Were you happier 40 years ago? Don't think about it too long. Just let the answer come, because I already know what it is. I can see it in the faces of every person over 55 who sits across from me and talks about their life. Their mouth says things are fine. Their mouth says the world has progressed. Their mouth says we have more now than we ever had. But their eyes tell the truth. Their eyes say something broke, something shifted, something that was holding the world together came loose, and nobody noticed until it was too late to fix it. And I want to talk about that today, because I think it's the most important conversation nobody is having. 40 years ago, people were happy. Not perfectly happy, not fairy tale happy. Not the kind of happy they try to sell you in advertisements with white teeth and sports cars. Real happy. The kind of happy that comes from knowing where you stand, knowing who your neighbors are, knowing that the food on your table came from somewhere you could point to, knowing that when you went to work in the morning, you were building something that would still be there tomorrow. 40 years ago, a man could work one job and support a family. Not a luxurious life, not a mansion and a yacht, but a house, a car, groceries, a vacation once a year if they were careful, a savings account that actually grew. The bills got paid, and there was a little left over, and that little bit left over was called security. And security was the foundation that happiness was built on. You didn't need to be rich to be happy. You just needed to not be afraid. Afraid of the next bill, afraid of the next doctor visit, afraid that one bad month could undo 10 good years. 40 years ago, most working people were not afraid. They were tired. They were busy. They were imperfect in 1,000 ways, but they were not afraid. And that absence of fear, that is what made happiness possible. Now look around. Look at the world we live in today. People have more than they have ever had. More technology, more entertainment, more choices, more information, more convenience. You can order anything you want from a small glass rectangle in your hand, and it shows up at your door the next day. You can talk to someone on the other side of the world without leaving your kitchen. You can carry more music in your pocket than existed in the entire town library 40 years ago. We have more of everything, and we are miserable. We are more anxious than any generation that has ever lived. We are more medicated than any generation that has ever lived. We are more isolated, more distracted, more overworked, more in debt, and more lost than any generation in the history of this country. And nobody seems to be asking the obvious question. If we have so much more, why do we feel so much worse? I will tell you why. Because 40 years ago, people had something that technology cannot replace and money cannot buy. They had each other. They had community, real community. Not a group chat, not a social media page, not a neighborhood watch app that tells you when a package got stolen off someone's porch. They had people. Flesh and blood human beings who knew their name and their story, and their children's names and their dog's name, and what kind of pie they brought to the church potluck. They had neighbors who showed up when someone was sick, not with a text message that said, "Let me know if you need anything." They showed up with a pot of soup, and they sat in your kitchen, and they stayed until you felt better. That was community. That was connection. That was the thing that made happiness possible, even when the circumstances weren't perfect. Because the circumstances were never perfect. 40 years ago, people still had problems. They still had heartbreak and money trouble and health scares and difficult marriages and children who drove them crazy. But they didn't face those problems alone. They faced them surrounded by people who gave a damn, and that made all the difference. 40 years ago, work had a boundary. You went to work, you came home, and when you came home, work was over. There was no email pinging you at 9 o'clock at night. There was no laptop open on the kitchen table while your children ate dinner without you. There was no boss sending messages on a Sunday morning expecting a response before Monday. When you left the building, you left the job inside it, and you walked through your front door and you were home, fully home, present, available. Your body and your mind in the same place at the same time, and your family got all of you. Not the leftover scraps of you after the job had taken its share, all of you. And that presence, that simple act of being in the room with the people you love without half your brain still at the office, that was the foundation of family happiness. Today, people are never fully anywhere. They are at dinner but thinking about work. They are at work but worrying about home. They are on vacation but checking their phone every 10 minutes. They are in bed next to their spouse but scrolling through the lives of strangers. The body is in one place and the mind is in another, and nobody gets all of anyone anymore. We have split ourselves into pieces and scattered those pieces across a dozen screens and 100 obligations, and we wonder why we feel fragmented. We feel fragmented because we are fragmented. 40 years ago, people were whole. Not because they were smarter or better, because the world hadn't yet invented the technology to split them apart. I want to talk about dinner, because dinner is where you can see the difference most clearly. 40 years ago, dinner was sacred, not in a religious way, in a human way. The family sat down together, at the same table, at the same time, every evening, and they ate food that someone in that house had prepared with their own hands, and while they ate, they talked. The father asked about school, the mother told a story about something that happened at the market. The children argued about whose turn it was to do the dishes, and none of it was important in any grand sense. Nobody was solving world problems at that dinner table, but something was happening that was more important than any problem being solved. People were being seen. People were being heard. People were being reminded every single evening that they belonged to something, that they were part of a unit, that there were people in this world who cared what happened to them today. That 20-minute dinner was the glue that held families together, and we ripped it apart. We replaced it with drive-thrus and microwave meals, and everyone eating at different times in different rooms, staring at different screens. And we call that normal now. But it is not normal. It is the absence of the one ritual that kept families connected for thousands of years, and we gave it up for convenience. We traded 20 minutes of togetherness for the freedom to eat alone faster. That might be the worst trade in the history of human civilization. Let me tell you what a Saturday looked like 40 years ago, because I think people have forgotten. A man woke up in the morning and drank his coffee on the porch, not scrolling through bad news on a phone, just sitting there, watching the street, listening to the birds, feeling the air on his face, and then he walked to his neighbor's house to help fix a fence that had come loose in the last storm. And while they fixed the fence, they talked. Not about politics, not about culture wars, not about whatever outrage the media was manufacturing that week. They talked about real things. How's your boy doing at school? Did you hear the Hendersons are having another baby? My truck is making a noise. You think it's the transmission? Real things, small things, human things. And then in the afternoon, the kids were outside, all of them, running in packs through the neighborhood like wild animals, playing games that didn't need a charger or a Wi-Fi signal, getting dirty, getting scraped up, getting into trouble, and getting themselves out of it. And the parents weren't watching them through a camera or tracking them on an app. They were trusting them, and trusting the neighborhood to keep an eye on them, because the neighborhood did that. Every adult on the street was a temporary parent to every child on the street. If a kid fell off a bike in front of your house, you didn't call the parents. You picked the kid up, cleaned the scrape, gave them a glass of water, and sent them back out. That was normal. That was how it worked. And on Saturday evening, people gathered at someone's house, at a barbecue, at a church hall, around a fire, and they sat together, and they ate together, and they laughed together, and they argued together, and they were alive together. In the same space, breathing the same air, looking each other in the eyes. That was happiness. It didn't cost anything. It didn't require a subscription. It didn't need to be optimized or upgraded or downloaded. It was just people being with people. And it was enough. Now let me tell you what a Saturday looks like today. A person wakes up and the first thing they do is reach for the phone. Before their feet touch the floor, before they have spoken a word to another human being, they are already scrolling, already absorbing bad news and opinions and advertisements and images of other people's lives that make their own life feel smaller. They drink their coffee in front of a screen. They eat their breakfast in front of a screen. They spend the morning doing errands alone, using self-checkout machines so they don't even have to speak to the person at the register. They come home and the kids are in their rooms, each one in front of their own screen, living in a digital world that their parents can't see or enter or understand. Nobody is outside. Nobody is at the neighbor's house. Nobody is fixing a fence or sharing a conversation or watching each other's children. The doors are closed. The curtains are drawn. Everyone is alone together. And in the evening, instead of gathering with other families, they sit on the couch and stream a show and scroll their phones at the same time and call it relaxation. But it isn't relaxation. It is numbing. It is the slow, deliberate replacement of real life with a simulation of life. And the simulation is beautiful. It is high definition and surround sound and perfectly curated and available on demand. But it is empty. It has no warmth, no heartbeat, no soup when you're sick, no hands to hold when you're scared, no voice in the next room that reminds you that you are not alone. Before I share the next teaching, one quick thing. Everything I have been pulling out of these old ways, the teachings about why happiness disappeared, about protecting your peace after 60, about understanding what the modern world took from us. I have written it all down. 20 teachings, 4 parts, in the order they were meant to be received. It is called The Native Way. Link is in the description of the video. But stay right here, because what I am about to say next is the part that people tell me changed the way they see everything. I want to talk about what we traded. Because happiness didn't just disappear. We traded it. We traded it for convenience. We traded it for speed. We traded it for efficiency. Every single thing that made life slower and messier and harder 40 years ago was also the thing that made it richer. Cooking a meal from scratch took time, but that time was spent in a kitchen with your family. The smell of bread baking, the sound of your mother humming while she stirred, the feeling of being part of something that nourished not just your body but your soul. Now you microwave a frozen meal in 4 minutes and eat it standing up over the sink and call it progress. Washing clothes used to take half a day, but it was half a day spent with other women, talking, laughing, sharing stories, building bonds that lasted decades. Now you throw a load in the machine and scroll your phone for an hour and you've saved time but lost something that time cannot measure. Getting somewhere used to take longer because you had to stop and ask directions. But that stop turned into a conversation with a stranger who became a friend, who became a story you told for 20 years. Now you follow a GPS in silence and arrive 3 minutes faster, and you don't speak to a single human being along the way. Everything we automated, everything we made faster, everything we optimized and streamlined and made more efficient was also something we made lonelier. We didn't notice because each individual trade seemed like a good deal. Of course you want faster. Of course you want easier. Of course you want more convenient. Who wouldn't? But nobody added up the trades. Nobody looked at the total bill. And the total bill is this. We traded our time with each other for time with machines. We traded our conversations for content. We traded our front porches for social media feeds. We traded our Saturday gatherings for streaming subscriptions. We traded our communities for convenience. And now we are sitting in the most advanced, most connected, most technologically miraculous civilization in the history of the human race, and we are lonelier and sadder and more medicated than any people who have ever lived. That is not progress. That is a robbery that happened so slowly, nobody called the police. My grandmother never had a dishwasher. She washed every plate by hand in a basin of water that she heated on the stove. And every evening after dinner, she stood at that basin and she washed and her sister dried and they talked. Every evening, for 40 years, the same basin, the same routine, the same conversation that had no agenda and no purpose except to keep two people connected to each other. When my grandmother got old and someone offered to buy her a dishwasher, she said no thank you. And they thought she was being stubborn. They thought she was just an old woman afraid of new things. But she wasn't afraid. She was wise. She knew that the dishwasher would wash the plates better and faster and cleaner than her hands ever could. But her hands weren't just washing plates. Her hands were holding on to her sister. Her hands were holding on to the conversation. Her hands were holding on to the only time in the day when the world slowed down enough for two people to just be together without rushing to the next thing. She wasn't saying no to the dishwasher. She was saying yes to the relationship. And that is a distinction that the modern world has completely lost. We say yes to every machine that promises to save us time, and we never ask what we are going to do with the time we saved. And the answer, if we are being honest, is nothing. We fill it with more scrolling, more consuming, more nothing. The time we save is not being spent on each other. It is being spent alone. And that is the real cost of convenience. I don't tell you these things to make you sad. I don't tell you these things to make you wish for a past that can never come back. The world has changed, and it will keep changing. And there is no going back to the Saturday I described. But there is going forward with open eyes. There is going forward knowing what was lost and choosing to rebuild some of it. I want to tell you about something that happened to me recently that brought all of this into focus. I was visiting a town I hadn't been to in years, a town I used to know well. And I drove down the main street looking for the places I remembered. The diner where everyone used to gather on Sunday mornings. Gone. Replaced by a chain restaurant with a drive-through. The barber shop where men sat for 2 hours getting a 15-minute haircut because the conversation was the real reason they came. Gone. Replaced by one of those quick-cut places where they don't even know your name. The hardware store where the owner knew every customer and would spend 30 minutes helping you find the right bolt for your screen door. Gone. Replaced by a warehouse store the size of an airplane hangar where you walk the aisles alone, reading labels and hoping you grab the right thing. Every place where people used to bump into each other, where conversations happened by accident, where relationships were built without anyone trying to build them, all of those places had been replaced by something faster and cheaper and more efficient. And every replacement had removed one more reason for human beings to be in the same room at the same time. I parked my truck and I walked down that main street and I counted the number of people I passed who were looking up, looking at the sky, looking at the trees, looking at another human face. And the number was 2. Out of maybe 40 people on that street, 2 of them were looking at the world. The rest were looking at their phones, walking and scrolling, sitting on benches and scrolling, standing in line and scrolling, living in a 6-inch rectangle while the entire world, the real world, the world with wind and light and faces and color, was happening all around them unseen. And I thought to myself, this is it. This is the moment my people were warned about. This is the moment when the machine became more interesting than the earth, when the screen became more compelling than the sky, when the simulation became more comfortable than reality. And people chose the simulation, not because they were forced to, because it was easier, because reality asks something of you. Reality asks you to be present, to be uncomfortable sometimes, to face things you don't want to face, to sit with silence, to feel boredom and not run from it. The simulation asks nothing. It just feeds you, endlessly, effortlessly. And the more it feeds you, the less you want to get up from the table. My people have a teaching about this. We say that a man who eats without hunger will forget the taste of food. And that is what has happened to happiness. We consume so much stimulation, so much entertainment, so much distraction, that we have lost our ability to taste the simple things. A sunset used to be enough to make someone stop and feel something. Now it's a photograph they take and post and forget about before the colors have even faded from the sky. A conversation with a friend used to be the highlight of a week. Now it's something people cancel because they're too tired from doing nothing. A home-cooked meal used to make a family feel rich. Now it's an inconvenience that takes too long compared to ordering delivery. We have numbed our ability to feel the small joys, and the small joys were the only real ones. You can put the phone down. You can knock on your neighbor's door. You can cook a meal from scratch and invite someone to eat it with you. You can sit on your porch and wave at the people walking by. You can call an old friend and talk for an hour about nothing. You can turn off the screen and turn toward the person sitting next to you and say, "Tell me something. Tell me about your day. Tell me about your week. Tell me something real." Those are small things. But 40 years ago, happiness was made of small things. And it can be made of small things again, if you choose it, if you protect it, if you guard it the way you would guard a fire in a windstorm. Because that is what happiness is, a fire. And the wind has never been stronger than it is right now. But the fire is still there. It is small. It is flickering. But it is there. And all it needs is your attention. All it needs is your presence. All it needs is for you to stop feeding the wind and start feeding the flame. If what you heard today stayed with you, the book is there. The Native Way. 20 teachings, 100 pages, written the way I would speak to you if we were sitting together. Link is in the description of the video. Read one chapter. Sit with it. Now I want to hear from you. Tell me in the comments, what is one thing from 40 years ago that you miss the most? I read every comment. And if this is the kind of conversation you have been looking for, subscribe to this channel. We are not collecting viewers here. We are collecting people who remember. Come back next week. I am not done teaching yet.